Lucas, do you get a response when people accept invitations on there?
Yes, I think that we were going to be about six today, so
Yep.
this
Yeah, I
says
was just wondering if we're waiting for a sixth person.
the only people that are usually here are supposed to be CTN. We're still live on YouTube, but they aren't. Oh, Senator Summers is about to join.
Okay,
And so yeah, I'll have to follow up with them. Maybe, hopefully they can jump in, but at least we'll be live on the YouTube for everyone to see.
perfect. Okay. All right, I think we should get started, although we're a very small group today. Um, I just put a link to our working document in the chat. And at the end of the working document is our kind of an extended agenda for today, or it is the agenda for today, but it's also where I'll add notes as we discuss some of the things we're going to talk about today. We can do a quick round of introductions, although I feel like I'm getting to know everybody pretty well now. I'm Jamie Vaudry from the Connecticut National Estuarine Research Reserve and University of Connecticut. Let's see, Kelly, why don't you go next?
Hi, Kelly Strike with Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
All right. Lucas?
Hi, everybody. I'm Lucas. I am the interim clerk of the Environment Committee, and I am the administrator of the working group.
And Craig?
Hi, Craig Tobias, Yukon Marine Sciences and Groton Shellfish Commission.
Larry?
Hi, Larry Dunn, Groton Conservation Commission.
And Zach?
Hi, everybody. Zach Gordon, the NOAA Milford Lab and Connecticut Sea Grant.
And Senator Summers?
Oops. Good afternoon, everyone. Senator Summers. I'm not on video because I'm jumping between three meetings the day before Thanksgiving. So glad to be here.
Yes, thank you. All right, so I thought the turnout might be a little light for this meeting right before the holiday, and so scheduled some what I would call some non-controversial topics for today, or certainly less controversial topics. I did want to mention that that I think we've got our schedule set. Why don't I just share my screen? That's probably easier. Share screen, share. So we do have our schedule set pretty well through that February deadline that we're looking at. Our next meeting is December 7th. Lucas, we weren't finding a good agreement on December 18th, December 19th. I think there were only 3 or 4 people that could make it each day. I thought we might ask about December 21st. This may also just be a really bad week for people. And then the following one is January 10th, and then January 24th is the review of the final draft. The outline of the document is available. So this document that I'm in right now is the one that Lucas shared the link to. This is our working document, and there is a link to the outline for the work group report, and I'm just looking for it up here. I did a little bit of reorganizing. I also filled in some people's names, and they are currently highlighted. So I put down myself and Bill Lucy for monitoring and change analysis of eelgrass to kind of review that. I mentioned at our last call that this topic comes up in not next meeting, but the following meeting. And Bill and I will report out on some presentations that are going to be given at the Eelgrass Collaborative. I think that meeting is December 12th. So rather than creating all of that information ourselves, we'll hear what the two folks, Jill Carr and Michael Bradley, have to say on the topic during those Eelgrass Collaborative meetings, and that will also inform what we include in these recommendations. So moving forward, kind of getting the state of the art information on where mapping and change analysis is in Southern New England and Long Island Sound specifically. The other ones I added were, I added Kelly and myself for the preservation and restoration of eelgrass, kind of the policy, legislation, and recommendations. And again, this is, we do have some assist coming with this, where one of my students, Emily Watling, was already working on pulling together a lot of this information from neighboring states into a document, and that should be done by next week. So I think this is on tap for the following week to kind of look at this information, review it, and decide how it might impact our recommendations. Zach and Tessa had stepped forward for the engaging the community piece. We haven't really talked about that yet, but well, we did start talking about it. I take that back. We did start talking about it at our last meeting in terms of the importance of engaging the community around restoration. And then pulling together the working group recommendations. I will take the lead on that in terms of pulling together what comes out of our discussions and summarizing those here for people to review and to respond to. So just a reminder that we have topics laid out for the next couple meetings, and those are shown here in this agenda in case you want to know what's coming. And I kind of touched on it already. So today we're going to talk about stressors and some restoration. Next time we'll be talking about more the policy and legislation within Connecticut, but then also within the neighboring states and how that might inform what we recommend. The following meeting, December 21st, if that ends up being a good date, we'll talk about the change analysis and engaging the community. So Zach, I will be reaching out to you and Tessa just to see if you can put together some thoughts for people to respond to during that meeting. And then after that, we're really just into pulling together our recommendations, summarizing what we've discussed during these meetings, and getting that final draft ready. So that's our last month or so of meetings. Okay, so I'm going to give a quick overview of the stressors to Connecticut's eelgrass. Then I'll turn it over to Craig to talk about eelgrass habitat restoration. And then I thought we would dive into some potential recommendations, both related to stressors and eelgrass habitat restoration, but also anything that we think might be missing or that we need to discuss or look into, do some background mining to get more information. So that's the goal of that last half hour or so, is to really think about what are we missing, and is there anything we can come up with in terms of stressors, eelgrass habitat restoration, but also returning to those ideas of policies and hurdles to eelgrass restoration in Long Island Sound. Any thoughts before I dive in here? Any thoughts, questions, inputs? Okay. All right, let me figure out how to share this. There we go. All right, so this is getting into the report. This is section 2.2, stressors to Connecticut eelgrass. I think I should just come back. I did, as I mentioned, I did a little reorganizing in the report as I was looking at what we had discussed last time. So the report layout is we'll have a little bit of background. We'll do current knowledge and existing efforts. And this is where the benefits of eelgrass habitat come in. This is one thing we had added as being important. Stressors to Connecticut eelgrass got moved to this section. And then the monitoring and change analysis and eelgrass habitat restoration. So that's all kind of background and state of the knowledge of our understanding of these systems. Then we, the bigger topic, so that's kind of all, state of the knowledge, background information on eelgrass. Then we get into those potential barriers to restoration that we're talking about a little each time, engaging the community and that recommendation. So what I'm talking about today is this stressors to Connecticut eelgrass piece. So we had identified, we discussed these stressors last time and we added a fifth. We have nutrient pollution, rising temperatures, physical damage, and poor water quality, and then predation and invasive species such as swans or green crabs or Canada geese, their impact on eelgrass. I'm going to return to this image after I've gone through some of the stressors, but I thought that this might be a way to talk both about the ecosystem services and about these stressors. This image here it includes tropical seagrass. We don't need that. It's also not open access, so we can't, or I don't feel comfortable certainly, just grabbing it and using it in a report. But the visual vocabulary, all of these little icons are freely available for use. So we can create something that looks very similar to this and to talk about those ecosystem services and stressors to eelgrass. So at the end, I want to talk about what we think about this idea of using this image or a similar image and what we might want to include on it. All right, so starting off with nutrient pollution, I thought that we'd first start talking about population trends. And I'm going to ask you guys to jump in here with any thoughts as we're going through this. So my thought with the nutrient pollution is talk about population trends and then link that to nutrient input and in turn to why nutrient is a problem, why nutrients are a problem for eelgrass. So these are some things that I just pulled up quickly in terms of population trends. The one on the right side of your screen is from NOAA's website on Connecticut, and it shows that we have 61% of our population living in coastal areas, and that we are a very coastal state. We have a lot going on in our coastal areas. The figure on the left is a population trend from the Census Bureau, and it's just census data from 1900 to 2020, the census data. And the point that I'm just trying to make with this is that population is increasing over time. I think we hopefully all know that Long Island Sound has made good strides with reducing our nutrient input. But while we have reduced our nutrient input considerably by upgrading our wastewater treatment facilities and taking care of some of our non-point source loads, we are continuing to increase in population. And that increase in population, even if each person is putting out less nutrients into the sound, are still contributing nutrients to the sound. So these were just images I pulled, and if we think this is a good direction to go, I would probably find something much more relevant to Connecticut, because this is the whole country here, and kind of a very, NOAA's very coarse overview of like some demographics in Connecticut. But that was one, the trend of thought is say, okay, populations are increasing. With that, we increase our nutrients, mention the reductions in nutrient loads, and then make that link between nutrients and water quality. This is kind of what
How do you
this.
want to manage comments during this?
Yep. Let me just give a quick overview of this, and then let's go back to the beginning and in nutrient pollution here and talk about it. I just want to give you the full idea of what direction I was thinking. So the figure here on the right is a relatively well-known figure showing sources of nutrients into coastal waters. My big question is going to be, is it too much? And then the other thing that I was going to suggest is adding images, photos throughout showing some of the issues related to nutrient input. So this one on the lower left shows seaweed blooms around eelgrass. This one on the upper left shows things growing on the eelgrass that is stimulated by nutrients. All right, so that was all I had for this section. Larry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I kind of like I'd almost flip it a little bit, because the pollution runoff people can relate to, and the picture I think is relatable. The issues would probably need to be annotated on the pictures to point out, the fact that there is an attack on the plant itself. But I'm not sure about the connection between, just because population goes up doesn't necessarily mean pollution has gone up. So
that's right.
Don't we have pollution measurements in the sound, over time that can be more specific on pollution rather than population?
We do. And I actually, let me see if I have it. I may have closed the presentation I was thinking of. We do. The problem is that it's not terribly clear. I don't know. Kelly, do you have, or Craig, both of you guys work on these issues?
Yeah, so Mike Whitney's got, an end load. Mike and Penny have an end load budget from like 2016, but I don't know if it's got any historical data in it. And my only other thought, I was thinking the exact same thing, Larry. And my only other thought was whether or not USGS has anything that they've put together that might not encompass the whole sound, but at least give you, because really you're just kind of, you're not looking for a specific number. You're just looking for a graphic that basically indicates rising nutrients, right?
Yeah. Or another way to do it is the number
or
of
leveling off.
Yeah, the number of incidents reported that says, you can't extract shellfish from this area. If there was 10 a year, now it was 12 a year, then it was 15 a year. Even if you don't have an absolute number, there's a trend associated with something's happening, right? So I mean, I know the number of incidents should be tracked. Doesn't seem like there's that many of them, though. Am I wrong with that, Greg?
Yeah, I think it's catch as catch can. I think that's right. I don't think there's lots of them, and I can't think of. I mean, DAB must have a repository, an archive, for different areas. But those would only be areas that sort of have recreational shellfishing anyway. I guess if the point here is to make a couple of points, the first point being nutrients bad. There's some graphic that can demonstrate that, the nutrient loads are still reasonably high. But the other point that might be worth making is that we actually are making headway on nutrients. So, finally, after many decades, we can start talking reasonably about, restorations. I mean, if we tried to do whole scale restorations 30 years ago, when nutrient landscape was very, very bad. I mean, that's kind of a fool's errand, but we're actually getting potentially to a tipping point where we might be able to get some good return on our investment just because things are a little bit better now.
Yeah, well, that's actually better because if you can tie actions and restrictions in, let's call it the nutrient sources, and the fact that it has improved, then when you get the recommendations, it makes it easier to say we have to continue those restrictions or add to the restrictions, which would, reduce the pollution levels even further. I'm just trying to think to the end and how this stuff ties together.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and really an important one to get the messaging right. And I think, so combining what both of you have said is important. Saying, because we need to say, look, the nutrient reductions have worked. We can restore eelgrass in some places. But as Larry just said, continuing reductions, continuing effort to keep that nutrient input lower is important, especially if we want to continue to expand the area where eelgrass can be reduced.
Yeah, so Jamie, I think you might be able to achieve both things with one figure like this.
Yeah.
Which basically shows the decline if you just put another line on it, which is sort of, your best guess at pre-industrial loading, right? Because that matches really well with the historical accounts of where eelgrass was, reports from the 1800s, which were like eelgrass was everywhere. So if on a graphic like that, you kind of hindcast or used your best judgment to put what you think is a 19th century nutrient load when we had grass, I think it shows both that we're still not where we want to be, but we're getting better, and hope sells a little bit better than tragedy.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we're never going to get back to,
No,
1800.
Sure, right? It's returning to Neverland, but
Right, yeah. Well, but
it's,
the point is that you mentioned tipping point. So between Nirvana, which is, the 1800s level, and where we are, I mean, where is that tipping point? We need to keep
except
it
for the
low.
diphtheria, but yeah.
So, trying to be reasonable about what's a reasonable objective. Historical data says you ain't going to get better than that, right? That's the best you'll ever get. We're not going to achieve that, but this is maybe what our target should be, or our new target, because there was a target given the graph you just showed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think defining that new target is part of what both Connecticut and New York are working on with the Long Island Sound study to try and say, okay, we made that target. We need to go further. What's the next step? The tipping point idea, I'm trying to have too many screens here. The tipping point idea, I kind of put it up in this graphic here. So this is an old conceptual model. It's from 1997, but still widely quoted today. And it gets at that tipping point that, nitrogen loading is increasing. And as it, at the lower end of nitrogen load, seagrass does well. That's what this is saying, is there's lots of seagrass, more than 50% of seagrass. As you increase that nutrient loading, you eventually lose your seagrass and it gets replaced by seaweed. And if you go too far, it gets replaced by phytoplankton, the blooms in the water column itself. Is this too much, or do we talk about it? Do we put something like this visual in there? What are your thoughts on the level? So I'm always curious to know, where is that sweet spot for too much science, too much technical jargon versus giving people the information that they need.
I mean, for me as a science guy, I like it, but I think it would be more digestible if you just took the macroalgae and the phytoplankton off and, just had the seagrass
Oh,
potentially.
yeah, yep. Yeah, there is even data associated with that, showing that as you increase the nutrient load, you lose your seagrass. And there are systems. Yep, I think I have a good idea for that. So I'll put that in, and then we'll again revisit it and say too much or not enough.
Yeah. But then if you overlay that with what we just talked about, the
Yeah.
1800s, where we were when we first started legislation, the new reduction, it leaves room for the new target. But it's almost where we started, the couple levels where we started the reduction program, how that much accomplished. Here's Nirvana, which is the 1800s, and then what is the level between there we would recommend. I mean, that would overlay on this chart, which would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because it then implies the level of restoration that we're aiming for. Right? So, yeah.
All right, sounds good. We will definitely have time to talk about this more later. On to the next one, which is rising temperatures. And I threw a couple
Excuse
different.
me,
Go ahead.
yeah, can I'm the guy to ask stupid questions. So when you have the increase in seagrass, I'm sorry, not you have the increase in the on the prior chart.
Nutrients? The
Yeah, no, not the
nitrogen?
nutrients. Yeah, the oh Jesus, hard to read. That center one.
Macroalgae.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know we spend money removing that from beaches, etc. Is there a cost to that? Just kind of
There is a cost to the seaweed removal. And I know Stonington Borough was spending thousands and thousands of dollars to remove seaweed from a tiny little stretch. It was like maybe, I don't know, a stretch of beach that was maybe 30 feet wide, 40 feet wide. And they were spending a lot of money to remove that seaweed. So yes, there is absolutely a cost associated with it.
Is that cost large enough to be of interest as another savings in the cost benefit equation? At the beginning, I know Groton spends on the little tiny beach we have. They got machines coming in, the dump trucks coming in. I mean, because it just piles up there.
Yeah.
So that's why I was thinking. I don't know if it's enough to move the needle on the cost side. That's all I was asking.
Yeah, I think that the costs for nutrient removal are so high that it may be an order or two of magnitude less, but it's important to highlight because it's something that we're familiar with. We've all seen beaches being raked and material being removed. And so even though, it may not tip the scale and like, oh, if we can stop doing this, it makes, sewer upgrades affordable. I think it is important for highlighting, some of the benefits you get, because that's not the only benefit you get by reducing nutrients. You get cleaner water, which allows for shellfish beds to be open more often and more vibrant recreational fishing community. And that's just like one, like there are lots of benefits that you get by improving water quality. But I think highlighting those visible ones, even if they are not the most economic, the highest economic reason for doing something, they are a very visual one that people can relate to.
That's a good point. It's probably the most visual because nobody can see underneath the water, but man, everybody knows about piles of seaweed, right? So that I kind of like that as another under the communications area, showing tons and tons of seaweed that we have to take care of. But anyway, okay. I'm sorry. I'll put myself
No,
back.
this is exactly what we're supposed to be doing.
No, that's a
Um,
good point. I liked the images, Jamie, of, the eelgrass with epiphytes and seaweed, but a lot of people might not relate to that, but they would relate to seeing a lot of macroalgae and buildup on the shoreline.
Yes.
And also, if you do need any more data for correlation, I know USGS did quite a bit of loading, and it might not be really, specific, but they did quite a bit, and I think it even goes back to like the 80s. Some of the trends.
Yeah, we were thinking along the same lines because I put a note on there that said I think USGS has older estimates. I also think the not our most recent CCMP, but the one before that also mentioned some older estimates. The one from the 90s.
Okay.
And so I can check those out and see if we can get that historical endpoint. But we would also be good to get some images of seaweed buildup on beaches, which I have lots of them. So that's not in, but if you guys have seaweed on beaches, good images of them, let me know. All right, so I threw in a bunch of pictures here, just graphics to look at so that we had something to react to in terms of rising temperatures. I think there's only two. Yeah, there's two here. So I think the point to make with the rising temperatures is that eelgrass, like every organism, like every living organism, has an optimal range of temperature, and it likes to be in that 10 to 25 degrees C. We'll convert these to Fahrenheit, which I think is what most people think in around here. But I did not do that for this. So they're in that 10 to 25 degrees C. Above 25 degrees C, especially in Long Island Sound, the plants are stressed and in some cases die. There is a paper that just came out in 2022 on the influence of rising water temperatures on the temperate seagrass species eelgrass in the Northeast USA. So it's very relevant to what we're doing here. And so we can mine that for a little bit of information, but basically I think it's that simple, is that eelgrass likes to be between 10 and 25 degrees Celsius. If you get hotter than that, it's unhappy. Then I think the thing to do relatively quickly is to review the local and regional temperature trends. How much has temperature changed? So I pulled a few figures here to think about how we might want to demonstrate that. I think there are images of global temperature trends. These are some local ones. So this one here in the orange and the yellow, this came out in 2021. This was Mike Whitney and Penny Vlahos's paper for Long Island Sound temperatures. And this is the temperature from 1994 to 2018. And it's I believe this is the average temperature. I would have to look back exactly what this is, but basically it shows that bottom water temperature in Long Island Sound has increased, from about 20 to almost 22. And they didn't put I don't think there's a trend line for the surface waters, but we do see that increasing trend. That's Long Island Sound, which is a little deeper. It does, I think, apply to seagrass, but it is the whole deep portion of Long Island Sound. We see similar trends in shallower water. So these other three plots here, this one that's really, really tiny is air temperature. This one up in the upper right is water temperature. This is the annual average from 1979 to 2018. And we see, a definite increase in that annual average. It's also broken out by season here. So this is fall, winter, spring, and summer. And in the lower left is the same data. This is these are the individual temperature readings every 15 minutes from 1976. Sorry, this was 1976 up here, 1976 to 2018. And I did zoom in on that because I know it's very small. So this is again the annual. So we're looking at summer is the high peak, winter is the low at the bottom here. I put a line at 25. So anything above 25 and eelgrass starts to be unhappy. And if you were able to zoom in on these, you can see that we do have points where it does get hotter. In 2012, there was an eelgrass die-off in Niantic and other areas associated with high temperatures in the summer. And you can see that 2012 is really the first time that we see temperatures above 25 for a really extended period of time, enough that you see this grouping of points here. We see that again in these 2 years here. Eelgrass was probably quite unhappy then as well. So the question becomes, how do we want to talk about the temperature here? How do we want to discuss temperature? I think we want one figure, not all of these. Do the trends like these, do we think that's the way to go? I could also see looking at, which year's temperature was above a certain threshold. So you can do things like more bar charts or pie charts showing, when temperature was above a threshold or something, probably some other image that I'm also not thinking about.
Jamie, the graphic by year that we were just talking about.
Yep.
Where does that represent?
This is Millstone's data, and it's at one of their intakes. So it's in Niantic Bay. So at that out in Niantic Bay, Long Island Sound, right at that Millstone point.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was the data we used in the data synthesis?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So from what you said, there's die-offs occur on basically when you hit some of these peaks. Is there a correlation that says, these years the temperature was up and a die-off occurred? Kind of the juxtaposition of those two things, because the trend is interesting, but you're really trying to say that it's not unhealthy, and here's the proof.
Yeah, let me see if I still have this thing open. So there is, I just didn't know if it was going to get too technical. And I think there are other ways, like if we want to do this information, I think there are other ways to make infographics that are more understandable. But these green dots are years of eelgrass, and the size of the dot represents better eelgrass years or more eelgrass. So this is a time when eelgrass was really good. This was a time when eelgrass was less good. And then over here, it was bad. And it's really highly correlated with temperature. Again, that plot is probably the worst plot to show you because it's like a million things in one.
Yeah.
But
Jamie, what document is this?
This is the Niantic data synthesis that I did
with
Kelly and Jason and Chris Calabretta. Yeah.
Got it.
So this is what
I think
this is what it came down to.
That. Yeah, I think a simplification of that other chart might be it, because you've got the temperature versus the health, whether it's the growth or reduction in eelgrass, and rather than too much data there, but if you can extract those two parameters, that might simplify it a bit.
Yeah. And we did do go ahead, Larry. Sorry.
I was just gonna say the follow-on question then says, we're not going to do a lot in terms of the temperature. Is there something to be done with the type of eelgrass we're using? Is there a more temperature resistant eelgrass that we can basically put in the Long Island Sound versus trying to go with the eelgrass that historically has been there, which is less resistant to heat.
Yes.
I guess I
And that
flipped
is,
to
you have hit
yeah.
on exactly what people are thinking about right now, is asking that question of, can we move eelgrass up from the south that is more temperature resistant? And it's not like far south, it's New Jersey kind of idea. But can we get something that is more temperature resistant? So let me just jot down, because we said a graphic which relates temperature, stress, and eelgrass success. The challenge of course is always that we don't have enough eelgrass data from Long Island Sound overall. So those figures that I was showing were from Niantic River, and then they also do 2 other sites in the kind of Niantic Bay area. And they monitored eelgrass. They monitored eelgrass many years, so we can use it as an example.
So I don't know if you necessarily have to, kind of reestablish that hot water is bad for grass.
Yeah.
I think there's enough precedent that's out there, and I think perhaps really all you want to show is, locally water's getting hotter.
Yeah.
So even if you took those temperature records and you took, break it up by year, the number of days where the water temperature exceeded X, 23 degrees C, or something that's established in the literature, and merely just cite kind of the volumes of other papers that effectively say grass doesn't like it hot.
Yeah.
That is, because your point is well taken. If you're trying to relate hot water to eelgrass failure, that's a correlative thing, and you might not have enough data points to really to be able to do that, or you might, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think we do in Niantic as an example, but definitely not in Long Island Sound yet. And this idea of doing a plot where it's, number of degrees where a specific temperature is exceeded, we actually have that data already from that data synthesis that I was just showing. So, so I'll pull that together into the draft of the document, and then we can respond to it and say, okay, but let's do it this way, or let's do it that way. All right, great. Let me get back to here. So the others are a little easier, because we just don't have any data on them. But another stressor well, we don't have any consistent data, I should say. Another stressor is physical damage. And this is really, I think, talking about the physical damage and showing images like these. So what you're seeing is a boat, and its anchor chain has caused a halo in these eelgrass beds. And so that's these circles that you're seeing in the eelgrass beds. That's what led to, companies coming up with conservation moorings to reduce or eliminate those scraping of eelgrass and other important habitats as boats were anchored. And of course, the other one is actual anchoring. So this is an anchor chain lying through eelgrass, which again, you can imagine it's swinging back and forth. So that's our biggest physical damage that has been identified in Long Island Sound. There are other physical damages, such as boats running through eelgrass beds and potentially pulling up the plants, their propellers pulling up the plants. Our eelgrass does tend to be a little deeper, and so that is not as bad as, say, in Florida, where they actually charge you for tearing up eelgrass beds if they catch you. I think that was all I had for physical damage. Any thoughts
Right.
on that?
Yeah, is there a regulation to have these conservation anchors, or is this just offering in the commercial marketplace?
I don't think there is a regulation to use conservation anchors. I think that
Okay.
I think the regulation now is don't put anchorages in eelgrass beds. Like you can't put new mooring fields in eelgrass beds. But I think
Yeah.
if eelgrass moves into a mooring field, or if that mooring field existed before the regulations came into place, or I don't know if they're regulations or recommendations or how that, what the legal term is there. But as far as I know, there's not a regulation to use conservation anchors in Connecticut.
Okay, so there's a thought, is that something we would recommend or not? The other thing in terms of the number of boats, I mean, I'm assuming that all these boats are registered or should be registered.
Yeah.
So is there some trend line that says over the last 10 years, people are buying more boats? So that, there's, the problem is getting worse, I guess, with the number of anchorages to registered boats that should be available, one would think.
Yeah, I think the Blue Plan might have some information on this. It's been probably definitely over a year since I looked at the Blue Plan, but I feel like they have a layer on boating activity. I don't know if they'll have a time, like increase in boating. But I know that they have some numbers on Blue Plan on where boating is most intense, and not surprisingly, I think the boating in the eastern Long Island Sound, Connecticut coastline is some of the highest boating activity in Long Island Sound. And of course, that's where we have the majority of our eelgrass. But do we have stats on boat sales? That would be an interesting number to have.
So
Other thoughts on physical damage?
I wonder if there's maybe more information, but it might just be too scattered, but permitted moorings and harbor management areas. Because boat registrations, they could be on the trailers.
Okay, yeah.
Or expansion of mooring areas, things like that.
Yeah, and really, it's not like we have to survey everywhere. I think if we took a few places where eelgrass is present, and looked at the mooring fields over time in those areas, that would get us some information. Okay. Next up was poor water clarity. Yep, poor water clarity. So I always like this image. It's an extreme situation, but it kind of highlights the fact. This is the river plume after Hurricane Irene in I can't even remember the year, but a while ago. And it just highlights the fact that rivers carry sediment, that fresh water carries sediment as it comes in, and that not all rivers are the same. So you can see the Connecticut River versus the Thames River here. There are some images, this kind of gives you that murky view through an eelgrass bed, so it can be dark in eelgrass beds. Poor water clarity is due to sediment in the water. It's also due to things like the shading of docks, and that's why I put this picture of the dock in the lower right-hand corner. A shadow is cast on the water and down on the sediment in the water. So that can also shade eelgrass. So poor water quality impacts eelgrass. It needs a certain amount of light. It needs a lot of light compared to a lot of other things that live in the marine environment. But it also helps with water clarity. And I put these two pictures in as a comparison. So the one on the right is a system with eelgrass, and the one on the left is a system without eelgrass. That's just bare sediment. And if you look at the end of this pole, you can see the water clarity is clearer around the eelgrass. These two photos were very close to each other. I want to say really, a couple hundred feet away from each other in Mystic Harbor. And just the presence of that eelgrass helped with the water clarity in that system. So eelgrass needs good water clarity. It helps improve water clarity when it's present, but if you get too turbid, it does not like it. So that was the gist of the idea of the flow that I was thinking for this one. Any thoughts on water clarity? All right, I'm going to move on to the last one, which is predation and invasive species. So things eat eelgrass, not many, mostly birds in our area. This is a picture of a brant. Swans and Canada geese are also well known to eat eelgrass, and in fact can decimate beds. There's records of them just wiping out new eelgrass beds in Maine. It was observed huge flocks of brant come in, of Canada geese came in, wiped out the eelgrass bed, totally mowed it down. Green crabs, which are shown on the left here, do not actually eat the eelgrass, but they do tend to slice the eelgrass, or they'll clip the eelgrass at the base as they are foraging, and so they're also detrimental. So there are these things which I won't, that are impacting eelgrass directly. And then the ones that I didn't put in here are there are some invasive tunicates that will cover the eelgrass and keep it from getting sunlight. And so those are the types of predation or invasive species that impact eelgrass. Any thoughts on additions to that one?
No, I'm just thinking about like what a recommendation would be.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't.
kill
Yeah,
all the swans, or
kill the swans and the Canada geese.
like,
That's a good
I don't think
question.
that's gonna be too popular.
Yeah, and maybe the recommendation is that a recognition that eelgrass is under a lot of stress, and that's why it's even more important to manage the stresses that we're able to control. Yeah.
Is, like consumption by the birds, is that kind of limited to the shallower areas?
Yeah, I think most of the birds that feed directly on the eelgrass are dabblers, which means that they don't dive down to it. So they have to be able to reach it with their long necks. Yeah.
Okay.
But it does pose a problem for restoration, and maybe this is where it comes in, if you put your new eelgrass in shallow areas, you're kind of laying out a buffet for birds to come along. So it may contribute or be something to consider when you're planning eelgrass sites.
Yeah, and depth is pretty heavily weighted in the suitability index, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. All right, so I do want to take just a few minutes to talk about let me see if I can get back to it. The image. So, I mentioned that this image is eelgrass around the world. So we're kind of getting rid of This bottom piece, which is different species of seagrass, we only have Rupia, this guy right here, and Zostera, which are right here. So it doesn't make sense to keep them. Getting rid of the tropical seagrass, and we get to something like this. So on the left are the ecosystem services, on the right are what we were discussing as stressors or things that contribute to seagrass loss. What do you guys think of this graphic approach? Some people love it and some people hate it. So how are we falling in on this? Oh, and you know what? I just realized the left side is a healthy community and the right side is an impacted community. So we've got like increasing temperature over here. I don't know what this is supposed to show us. Keep the geese in a pen? I don't know what that is. And then over here, they're roaming free. I don't get that one, but nutrient input from the land. Some of these need some further investigation. I'm not sure what this guy is. What are your thoughts on this type of diagram, though?
Well, it's the lower half of the diagram you showed earlier.
It what?
Yeah, I mean, you
broke up.
had, no, I'm saying it's the same picture that you had earlier. It was the top half, bottom half. This was the bottom half, I think.
Yeah.
You
Well,
had
the other one
temperate-
was the other one is tropical seagrass.
Right,
had,
yeah,
like-
that was
yeah.
it, right, yep.
I'll jump in real quick. I generally like the idea of a graphic like this, but kind of you explaining it and not really understanding what the different things mean kind of goes to the drawbacks. Like they need to be explained more or just illustrated a little better so they're clear. So it's not like something you have to interpret too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we would want something a little more, yeah, definitely more clear. I think that's one of the challenges of this particular style is that it relies on a lot of icons that you then have to look up. But in general, we think some kind of graphic that kind of pulls together the ecosystem services and the stressors is a good idea.
Yeah, I do. I think they mate well together, and pictures are good. Just, I echo I think it was Zach's comment that just a simplification.
Yep.
Like I don't, just pick the top three.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, so I will, I'll probably work on a mock-up of this type of illustration before our next meeting. Not that we'll spend a lot of time talking about it at our next meeting, but at least to give people a chance to look at it offline and make comments as we try to refine it and make sure that it is as clear as can be. Yeah. Okay, I am going to turn it over to Craig. Craig, do you want to share screen or do you want me to pull yours up?
Yeah, actually, if you've got it right there, you can pull it up.
I should have it. There we go.
Right. So Jamie's a tough act to follow. And I don't think I was entirely clear on my charge for this. So there's a little bit of overlap. But I'd like to at least just use it as a launching point for discussion. It summarizes some of the things that we've talked about in previous meetings, and it also draws fairly substantially from a document that was published by the Long Island Sound Study on eelgrass restoration and management. And so the charge of this committee was not just eelgrass restoration, but also preservation. So that's why I've kind of have a little mission creep from what Jamie asked me to do and include maintaining as well as restoring eelgrass habitat. So Jamie, if you can hit the next slide for me. And I think, you know, a reasonable place to start is, you know, where do we really have hope in Connecticut for doing one or both of those things? And unsurprisingly, it just tracks with water quality. And we're looking at the eastern part of the state, starting a little bit east of Guilford, until you get to the mouth of the Sound. This is eelgrass suitability index, and there's a lot of factors that go into it, including, you know, depth and water quality and all sorts of other stuff. But the upshot of the color coding is that, you know, if we're going to do this, we need to focus our efforts on the eastern part of the Sound. Next, Jamie. And so in, you know, reading a bunch of things, what I kind of distilled from it is that as far as eelgrass management goes, there's, you know, kind of a tripartite effort, that there's regulations, education, and restoration. Restoration, I think, is the funnest part, but maybe that's just me. And so, you know, the regulations that exist, you know, it's protected under the Connecticut Coastal Management Act. It's got some regulations guiding shading from structures and intentional disturbance from conflicting uses, including boating and aquaculture. But it also extends, you know, through the Coastal Management Act, to landside activities, which basically it constitutes sediment and nutrient management. So, you know, what goes on in the watershed is pretty critical to what you could expect in terms of being able to maintain existing eelgrass habitat or setting the stage for restoration of currently unvegetated habitat that may used to be a good suitable site for eelgrass, but is no longer. Next, Jamie. Right, so the education is largely divided into public education and policymaker education, and there is some overlap here in terms of, you know, activities and conflicting use on the water, as well as what amounts to nutrient management, essentially from septic systems and lawn management. And I guess that translates into the policy level by being able to soundly evaluate what competing uses are that may intentionally or unintentionally degrade eelgrass coverage or habitat. Providing really strong causal links between land and waterside activities and their extant effects on eelgrass health. And then using that information to identify actionable changes that, you know, could be implemented by either state or local policies. And I think that if you look at the educational and the regulatory efforts surrounding eelgrass, you know, they're largely designed to either reduce damage to existing beds and or to provide space or time for the natural recovery of beds that have become impaired. And so that is the difference between, you know, the educational and the regulatory efforts and what I would consider as bona fide restoration efforts. Next slide. Right, and so restoration comes down to, well, you know, if you're going to restore an eelgrass bed or you're going to open a restaurant, I guess it's all location. And there's a lot of different factors that go into assessing a site and gauging its suitability for restoration activity. You know, namely, did eelgrass used to grow there, right? That should be some indication. Is there eelgrass nearby? Is it shallow enough in terms of light penetration and water clarity? You know, competing ecosystem factors like the macroalgae right, that relate directly to either space or light availability. What kind of sediment is it? And is that sediment suitable for supporting young plants, planted seeds? In terms of grain size and chemistry, as well as the physical energy environment and proximity to natural beds, which sort of provide this natural seed stock to maintain restoration efforts. Next slide, Jamie. So I think that the restoration goals, the nuts and bolts of the restoration, and Jamie or Kelly, you can jump in here if you have some more to add, fall into one of two categories: either, transplanting existing plants, donor plants that you get from somewhere else, or planting seeds. And what you'll see is that in both of these, there are some common challenges. One is this idea of genetic diversity, something that Larry hit on, which is there's all these other climate stressors. So maybe the plants that grew up here might not be the best plants to be the next generation of plants. We need more heat tolerant plants or some other stress tolerant. So, genetic diversity, I think, is something that we should address in our recommendations. And with the genetic diversity, and whether you talk about sustainable harvest of seeds or donor plants, there are going to be scaling limitations. And we discussed these a little bit in the last meeting that we had, that, in order to be able to do restorations on a meaningful scale, we have to have adequate personnel and infrastructure on the Connecticut side of things. We have to be able to also judge efficacy of what it is that we've done, and how effective it is. And I think that, all of the restoration, it's not an either or, in terms of we're going to restore beds or, we're going to try to do education and regulatory actions, especially when it comes to the idea of habitat improvement and what goes on in the watershed. I think watershed management is still pretty key here, but there are also some other habitat improvements that could be explored in terms of potential soil amendments to make habitats that may have previously supported eelgrass that are no longer very conducive to growing new plants. There may be a little bit of ecological engineering that we can do to try to improve the success rate for those kind of restorations. I think that's the last slide, Jamie.
Yep.
Maybe? Right. So I'm just, this is a platform for further discussion to make sure I'm not missing some things. So I just kind of leave it open. And I think I'm going to have to coordinate with Jamie a little bit on her section and my section, so we can tighten up, where hers ends and mine takes over. But yeah, I'm opening it up for questions and comments.
I will say I thought what you said throughout that is like, we need to just take the transcript of that and massage it a little.
Okay.
And it was to me, it was a good progression through those topics. And I don't know if we have a transcript, but we have a recording, so we can
Yeah,
go back
we do,
and
right?
harvest it. Yeah.
Technology should work in our favor.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I can do that. Lucas can point me in the right direction to get the recording.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
of course.
figured-
It's going to be on our YouTube page, so I'll make sure I send out that link, and you'll find all of them on there.
Perfect. I'm sure there's some kind of transcribing tool.
Yeah, I mean, those are great charts. I'm just, my mind went to, is there something we're missing?
Yeah.
Because everything there is good. I remember all
Yeah,
the
and I think
discussion.
that question of is there something we're missing gets to the idea of the barriers. Like, is there some challenge that we haven't called out specifically, that is important for us to address in our recommendations?
Yeah, this was a little bit more 30,000 foot. So if you go back to a couple of slides, I think it's the policy maker one. Regulation, next one.
There we go.
Right, yeah, so the causal links between land and waterside activities, right? That's one bullet point with what, like 9 words in it, but that's a whole can of words.
Yeah.
And, that's where I think you explore this idea of, current aquaculture regulations, that are on the books are based upon an assumption, a precautionary principle, which I think needs to be evaluated to really determine, causal links or not between that activity and whether it's compatible or incompatible, with this eelgrass maintenance or restoration. So I think, each of these can have some other sub points underneath them, but
Yeah.
and maybe that gets to your question, Larry, about are we forgetting anything? Maybe we won't know for sure until I add a little bit more meat onto this.
Taking notes real quick. I think that question of those links between policy and how we understand the relationship between landside activities, waterside activities, and eelgrass health. I'm hoping that after that will be a big focus of our next meeting.
Okay, great.
And so that's when we'll get into those policies and regulations and what we have found or unearthed from both within Connecticut, but also from our neighboring states. And so it might be good to keep that in mind. And I'm going to put a note here to consider how other states address these issues. What can we learn from what other states have done? I think no state has gotten it perfect, or even good. There's some that probably have it good, but what can we pull out from what others are doing to hopefully jumpstart our activities in this realm? Yeah. Other thoughts? Okay, I think then that that I feel like these sections are starting to shape up. I'm gonna charge Craig with getting some of those thoughts on paper, and I will do the same. Yeah, I think that's good for today, unless anyone has things, and it doesn't have to be related to what we've talked to today, but anything that we should capture to think about as we're moving forward. I'm going to stop sharing my screen there so I can actually see you guys. There we go. All right, then I think we're good for the day. Have a good Thanksgiving. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. I think we settled, the date of the next meeting is December 7th, just so you know. So Lucas, if you are able to send out a meeting invitation for December 7th, that would be great. And then the other thing that I'm going to ask Lucas, if you could do, could you poll people on the possibility of meeting December 21st? If that
Yes.
date doesn't work, I think we might need to figure out a totally different week.
Yeah, no worries. So I'll send out the invite for the 7th and then try to gauge members' availability on the 21st.
Okay, great.
Yes, you all have a great Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you
Yes,
too.
you
Take care,
too.
everybody.
Bye all. Thank you.